Today, we begin a series of lectures or talks. The talks will deal with several aspects of human psychology. Today, I begin with the notion of what is the self. Who are me? Who are I? Who are we? We all have ideas of who we think we are, but is that all there is to us, the ideas we have? We all know from a purely psychological point of view that a human child is born, and from the moment the child is born, the child begins to observe his environment and relate to people around him or her. Generally, none of us, me specifically, do not remember what took place during our first 2 years of existence. Some people claim to remember things, say, age of 3. I can remember vividly what happened when I was 5, 6. So, generally speaking, we can say that a child is born with the potential to learn and to formulate an idea of who he or she thinks is in the world of the here and now. By the time a child is about 6 years old, the child has formulated the idea of the self. We call it the self-concept. Each of us has a self-concept. The self-concept is built on the experience of the child, generally drawn from his biological experience, how he felt in his body, and his sociological experience, how he interacted or how the environment around him interacted with him, especially his significant others. His significant others include his parents, his siblings, if he has any, his peer group, teachers, ministers, pastors. All these people have influence on the child's developing idea of the self. So by the time a child goes to school, the child generally has a sense of I, a self. And the influence of the school and how he does at the school during his elementary school days also plays a role in consolidating what he considers to be his self. So we can then say that in elementary school, most of us have discernible, identifiable self-concepts. We're not aware of it, but we do have self-concepts, ideas of who we think we are. Those ideas are also converted into self-image. So each of us has a self-concept and a self-image. The self-image meaning the picture the individual has in his mind of who he thinks he is. Subsequent to developing the self-concept and the self-image, most things the individual does is done through the auspices of the self-concept and self-image. Generally by adolescence, which is from age 13, 14 onwards, the child more or less looks at the world from the lenses of his self-image and self-concept. In adulthood, we all look at the world from our self-image and self-concept. It is probably true to say that it is difficult to see anything in our lives as they are, because we are looking at them from the presuppositions and preconceptions we have in our head and the self we have in our head. So if I say I'm looking at you, yes, I can see you, I can see light strike your body and send the image, a reflection to my eyes, and my eyes sends it to the brain that converts it into a picture of who you are. Well, during the whole process, I'm also looking at it from what is already inside my mind. I'm not looking at you with objectivity. Everybody looks at people with some bias, with some prejudice. But with a lot of effort, we can try to look at things the way they are. Scientists, at least, think they do. So science is that endeavor that human beings have found that enables them to try to look at their world, understand their environment, nature, as objectively as is humanly possible. Science does not proceed on what you told people that you see about phenomenon. Science says, show us what you see, write about it, and let us go observe and see if we can see it. So science then accepts only what all of us, or most of us, following what is called the scientific method, can see with our eyes, with our five senses, and then verify to be there. If it is possible, perform experiments to verify that they are there or is there. And also, Karl Popper added the additional element of science only accepts what is verifiable, what we all can verify, and what is falsifiable, disprove. But at any rate, science has found a way to ascertain what is true and what is not true. But when it comes to the self, science has not been able to do that. And yet, the idea of the self, who are we, who am I, is very critical in our lives. And yet, science is not able to tell us or help us that much to understand who we are. We make inferences as to who we are. As anybody in psychology knows, in the early part of the 20th century, there was something called psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis began by an Austrian psychiatrist called Sigmund Freud, embarked on trying to understand what constitutes the individual self. He came to the hypothesis that the individual has many forces in his head that are actuating him. So when we say, what is the self? Freud would say that there are three parts to that self, and we need to understand those three parts. The first part is what he called the id, ID. And I don't know how he got to that word, but let's just use it, ID. It is equivalent to what we might call instinct. What is instinct? So he says the individual has a nature that he came to the world with, that he called the id. And those things within the id, I think he does without consciously doing them. So the id, like, for example, he argued the nature of aggression, he says, is part of the id. The nature of sexuality is part of the id. And some other factors, he said, are part of the id. Is it true or not true? Well, let's say it is speculation that he believes that in the mind of the child is the id. He then goes on to say that human beings are those creatures that socialize their young people. We train our young people about what is acceptable behavior in our society. No society allows people to behave the way they want to behave, otherwise there will be chaos and anarchy. So generally speaking then, Freud says as we grow up, by the time we reach adulthood, let's say teenage years, we would have in ourselves what he called the superego. And the superego is a way of saying that in our head is the internalized norms of our society. We have incorporated into ourselves the rules of behavior, otherwise called norms, rules, laws, mores, whatever you choose to call it. But each of us has in his mind, according to Freud, the superego, what his society approves in his behavior. In traditional society, Lord, if we go back to primitive societies, if you do not behave as the society approves, you may actually be sanctioned or driven out of society, in worst case scenarios, killed. Okay, so we have the superego, which is the repository of what our society believes to be the right way to behave.